You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Let's get into the IPL then. Of course, there was the auction last Thursday. I'm taking it as we're all doing a cricket podcast on the IPL auction. We watched it, fellas.
We followed it in a manner.
It was good. It was the first one I've watched. It wasn't as boring as I expected it to be. So that's a thumbs up from me. What we're going to do here is we're going to go through each franchise and we're going to have a quick chat about who the winners and losers were. Now, fellas, this isn't a game show, but if it were a game show, there should be 4 winners and 4 losers. If you think about it, that's how it will balance out. So keep that in your mind when you decide whether a franchise has been a winner or a loser. And as ever, we will start with last year's worst team, the Rajasthan Royals. We highlighted prior to the auction that they needed to prioritise bowling, and particularly death bowling. I think it's probably fair to say they put their money where our mouths were, and spent 16.25 crore on picking up Chris Morris. Max, in your mind, let's tick this one off straight away. Was that good business?
Well, I mean, when you've got the money to spend and that's the kind of ideal sort of player that you need, then yeah, absolutely. We've seen enough people get it wrong, so go for it.
I thought it was as well. I mean, obviously it looks like a lot of money, but you have to remember that it was a mini auction, so there weren't loads of players available, and
classic supply and demand economics.
It was classic supply and demand. There weren't that many bowlers, to be honest, who were proven in those death overs and could bat a little bit. So, RCB should never have let him go, basically. Ross, the reaction in England to Chris Morris going for $2 million has been one of shock, basically. Can you really briefly explain why he might actually be a good T20 option?
Well, the issue that I think a lot of people who don't follow the IPL and don't have a basic grasp of kind of the supply and demand economics means that they compare kind of apples with, so it's completely different, right? They are sitting there going, oh, why is Adil Rashid not been picked? Why, how comes Alex Hales has not been picked up? And there's so many different things at play. And regardless if we agree with whether Alex Hales or Adil Rashid were picked up or not picked up, it comes back to the fact that the IPL teams, this is a mini auction. You're not going from scratch. They've got pretty much a full squad already. And picking up Chris Morris, who can do stuff at the start of the innings when opening and do stuff at the end of the innings, is actually quite a rare skill set, as well as his strike rate that he has coming in at the end. And we know that in T20 cricket, you've only got a small amount of balls to deal with and hit as many runs as possible. Rajasthan Royals finished last year because they couldn't get their batting lineup right. Steve Smith was awful for them throughout the whole tournament. And I think it's a great bit of business getting rid of him and actually picking up some of the players they have done along the lines of Chris Morris and Liam Livingstone.
There we are. Their CEO, Chris Lush McCrum, which is a boardroom name. He was very happy with what they managed to pull off. Chris Morris was their number one target, apparently. Alongside that, they won the sweepstake for Shivam Dube, rather. Mm-hmm. He went for 4 crore. It was overpriced, but as we said before the auction, there was a little bit of a dearth of Indian players that were proven in the tournament. So good for Shivam. And then as backups, they picked up Liam Livingstone and Mustafizur Rahman. In my mind, the Rajasthan Royals are a definite winner. I think their squad is much better than it was this time last week. I think Chris Morris is a really good IPL player, to be honest. Probably not worth $2 million, but in this auction, maybe he was. So maybe he is millions. I think they've got some good backups. I still think they've got a little bit of a problem overall in that they don't have the greatest Indian core, if you like, and that will probably stop them going from sort of last to first. But I expect them to challenge for the playoffs now. Nakul, on the Rajasthan Royals, were they winners or losers in your mind?
Certainly winners. I mean, they identified they had a hole there with the death bowling. They needed somebody other than Archer to be able to do that. Jofra Archer was the IPL MVP last year, and they still finished last, albeit in a very congested table. I mean, they could easily have finished fifth. With some things going slightly the other way. I think one of their games they lost was in a super over as well, so there's a certain amount of variance there. But yeah, Chris Morris was a very decent IPL player. He's a good death bowler, as we said. He can hit the ball a very long way. He's a very good fielder, and he can fill in at various points in the order. They have the spin. I mean, they don't have an elite spin bowler, but Shreyas Gopal is a very decent IPL spinner. Rahul Tewatia did bits and pieces, and we've certainly seen what he can do with the bat, albeit a couple of those were complete freak innings. He, by the way, has managed to get himself an Indian call-up, so
Yeah.
fair play to Rahul Tewatia. Karthik Tyagi and Jaydev Unadkat both very, okay with the ball. And then you've got potentially really powerful top order, which is, Joss Buttler, Yashasvi Jaiswal, the young Indian under-19 player, a very good player. Sanju Samson's taken over as captain. Ben Stokes had a good year. Interesting to see if they go with him opening again. I did a review of the auction piece for Guerilla Cricket and had Stokes in the middle order, allowing Buttler to go back to the top of the order and concentrate on what he's good at. Rajasthan got into this position last year where they needed two Joss Butlers. They needed him at the top of the order and in the middle order. And I think they filled a little bit of that hole. And then, they got the good backup, Shivam Dubey. Liam Livingston, who they released and bought back, invoking the Unadkat principle. This is something Rajasthan have been good at for a very long time, which actually I think is what RCB were trying to do with Morris, is let him go, buy him back for cheaper. It didn't work. It didn't really work because Rajasthan threw the bank at him. Still had quite a bit of money left over, actually, Rajasthan, by the end of the auction. Second only to Punjab in terms of how much money they had left over. Stephen Smith really unbalanced the team really last year, as did Robin Uthappa, and they've got rid of both of those. So it's interesting. They've got rid of all of their anchors over the last 3 years, Rahane, Smith, and Uthappa. And I think they look like playoff contenders. Having said that, and the other thing actually that's in Rajasthan's favour is that it doesn't look like they'll be losing Buttler, Stokes, and Archer towards the end of the IPL if they are in playoff contention this time round, which is something that has been a problem for them in the last few years. I would expect Rajasthan to certainly challenge for the playoffs based on their auction performance.
Max and Ross. Max, winners or losers?
Winners for me.
Winners for me.
Cool. Next on the list then, going from 8th to 1st, is Chennai Super Kings, Ross.
My favourite team to talk about. They are not my favourite team to follow. In our preview, we said that CSK had made a mistake in only freeing up one overseas slot when they needed more big hitting in their batting lineup throughout. And this decision ultimately resulted in a couple of things. A bidding war that they were never going to win for Glenn Maxwell. Picking up Moeen Ali for 7 crore, which, although it's expensive, I think is actually a really strong pickup with his ability to play spin. He offers a useful bowling option, and he's an experienced head at 33, 34, which CSK place a lot of value on. Not sure everybody else does. They then had to get involved with the domestic player bubble, which caused them to blow way too much money on Gautam. I don't know how to say it properly, so I apologise to our YouTube commenters in advance. But that was way too much money at 9.25 crore. Like, he is a pretty bang average player, and in the kind of open auction, I'll be surprised if he even went for a quarter of that, maybe. So the mini auction does crazy things to the mind. With these purchases, they had very little room to actually maneuver. So picking up 3 backups for 20 lakh and a pity purchase. And that pity purchase was
That's so harsh.
Well, it is a pity purchase. So there's no two ways around this, right? So it's Test Supremo Pujara. And I have no issue with the man or the talent he clearly has in the Test arena, but he is an awful pickup in a 2021, a T20 competition played in 2021. It is madness that they picked him up.
I think the only thing you can say is he was really cheap.
Yeah, I mean, he costs next to nothing, and yeah, all right, he's not exactly a T20 specialist, but he's a world-class batsman, so you never know. He might be able to actually.
He's got us talking about Chennai Super Kings as well.
Pujara's one of these players. He actually quite a very good list A average. Bizarrely, I think if we don't actually know where most of this IPL is going to be played, there is talk of it mostly being played in bubbles around Mumbai and Pune. If they do end up playing at Chennai, actually Pujara is a very fluent player of spin bowling, and if there's a bunch of injuries and they need him to do a sort of Kane Williamson style role at the top of the order, a kind of anchor scoring at just over a run a ball, sort of 120 runs per 100 balls, I could see him being able to do that. And as you say, it's a kind of a shot to nothing really with Cheteshwar Pujara in terms of him being able to do something. If it doesn't work, you haven't spent a lot of money. And the squad's reset next year anyway. KKR and the Sunrise has really kind of inflated the bidding for Krishna Gautam, who is a decent player, and I think was probably unlucky to be let go by a couple of different franchises.
I've got his numbers here: 24 IPL matches, averages 14 with the bat, at a good strike rate. It has to be said, it's a really good strike rate. But then with the ball, averages 43 and a poor economy. I think Ross is. I mean, like we can see why it happened, but this is a bubble purchase, in my opinion.
It's they needed something. The curious thing about him is he barely played actually last year. He had a really good season, a full season in 2018. Had a poor season in 2019, and then barely played last season. So it's really hard to work out exactly what he is as a T20 player. He's a backup option. He does the same kind of job that Moeen Ali does if you want to, in terms of an off-spinning all-rounder who can hit the ball quite hard. Not quite as well, but if you need the overseas slot somewhere else, then they overpaid for him, but they didn't really want anything else. Chennai had some of the raw materials they needed last season. Obviously, Suresh Raina being back for them is a big deal. Being someone who can inject some energy into their top order along with Moeen Ali, and we saw Sam Curran being able to do a good job for them at the top of the order. It's hard to see some of the players like underperforming to the same extent they did last year. Some guys like Ambati Raidu kept hold of Faf du Plessis, which I think is a good pickup. Ruturaj Gaikwad and Jagdishan were both players who grew into that tournament. Hari Nishant, who they've picked up as a 4-20 lakh, had a really good domestic winter for India. In the domestic tournaments. So is a potential useful option. And then the bowling wasn't a problem to begin with. So they'll take plenty of wickets, even despite the fact that they barely played Imran Tahir and DJ Bravo, who are two of the highest wicket takers in T20 history. I think Bravo is the highest wicket taker in T20 history. So it's a sort of a reset and model along until the mega auction type of deal for CSK, but I think it could work.
Well, Nakul, I think that they are one of the biggest losers of the draft. And I think they had the opportunity to build a playoff-worthy side, and I think they've missed out on a good opportunity. Moeen Ali could be a fantastic pickup for them if they play him at like 4, and he could be a real asset there. But he, like many others in their squad, as they demonstrated in IPL 20, they're inconsistent. They're not delivering all the time. And I think, unfortunately, the CSK retirement bus party will go around another loop of disappointment. And it's going to take something very special for them to have any chance of getting to the playoffs, let alone winning the IPL 21.
Do you want to hear from me and Max on whether we think they're winners or losers, Ross?
No, I don't. Yeah, we got Max. You winners or losers?
Yeah, I think probably ultimately just about losers. I don't think it's as disastrous as you make out, but I do find it a little odd that they've spent 60. They've spent one Chris Morris on both Moeen Ali and Krishna Gautam, which is it seems a lot to spend on two players who do roughly the same thing.
Jack?
Yeah, I think it's quite hard to say. So there's two things here. I think overall their auction strategy has been bad. I think only releasing one overseas player when they had the opportunity, I think, to do as you say, Ross, to rebuild the side to make it more playoff worthy was stupid. But bearing in mind they went into auction day with only one overseas spot to fill, I actually think they're a slight winner in that I think they've improved versus the competition today. So, since that auction. I mean, Gautam not amazing, but will probably play sometimes, and probably won't be a disaster.
Yeah,
Moeen Ali, pretty good.
But you're saying that, so with the bit for me is the auction strategy in general. Right? Going in with one overseas slot was a massive error for them. So okay, if we're playing with just the how did the auction go with the constraints they put on themselves, it's actually fine. if I was a sprinter and I shot my leg before the start of the game and go, oh, I still made it to the finish line before bleeding out, doesn't mean I did a good job being a sprinter, does it? Because I put the constraint on myself.
No, I get your point.
I do like the idea of CSK doing some kind of stunt auction where they handicap themselves. I mean, certainly they didn't really use Josh Hazelwood last year. They barely used Mitchell Santner, who actually I think could be a really useful T20 option for somebody. And actually, particularly given if there are games at Chepauk this year, could be really dangerous. I remember in IPL 2019, he had one game where he was just unplayable. The ball was turning from outside leg and missing off, and his ability to turn the ball at pace. And he's a good batter as well, and he's a very clever cricketer. He's a classic case of a good overseas all rounder in the wrong team. In that sense, and yeah, they probably could have freed up. And maybe if they weren't going to use Bravo or Tahir, but I think it's they want to keep the band together for one last hurrah, one final farewell concert, and then I think they're looking at rebuilding next year in the mega auction. So I think it's almost, I don't know if winners or losers, they sort of refuse to play, I think is the best way of putting it in the auction.
Fair enough. Who should we go to next, Jack?
Well, Punjab Kings, or Punjab, as we were corrected.
Punjab Kings, yes. Newly named from Kings 11 Punjab, now Punjab Kings. So their marquee purchase, they had let's talk about the areas they need to improve on really in this auction. I mean, probably quite a few. They needed to sort out their bowling a little bit, particularly at the death. And then also really needed a bit of lower order hitting. So their biggest purchase was Jai Richardson for 14 crore, which TCP's Dan Weston's friend of the podcast. He really valued his skill set. I mean, we've mentioned already the valuable skill set that Chris Morris has of being able to bowl death overs and hit it in the lower order, and that's sort of I guess exactly what the Punjab Kings have done. So do you think Jai Richardson's a good pick overall, albeit for a little more money than you might expect?
I think I think we're probably going to say the same thing. If Dan Weston says he is, then Dan Weston probably knows more than us.
I would trust Dan. Yeah.
I did a series of IPL preview team by team videos, and people I was doing it with, we picked Jai Richardson as the must-have for about 4 different franchises, and I think you could see that in how sought after he was. The confusing thing was that you would think Riley Meredith is the if we can't get Jai Richardson option, but they ended up with both of them. Not quite sure how that worked. I guess if one of them gets injured, it's fair enough. And they had a huge amount of money to spend, mostly through the fact that they got rid of that they released Glenn Maxwell, who for some reason just didn't work last year. It absolutely should have worked, and it should have been one of the most exciting T20 batting lineups of all time with Gale and Pooran and Glenn Maxwell. It just didn't work for whatever reason. KL
Rahul, the ball eater. That's why.
Yeah, indeed. KL Rahul, power play specialist, who then just sort of stopped repeatedly.
But better protect that T20 average.
Indeed. It actually makes Darwin Milan, who they also picked up, is actually quite a good foil for KL Rahul, because the fact that Rahul, the worms cross over quite nicely, because Rahul starts very quickly and then plateaus, and then Darwin Milan's classic 10 off 10 ends up as a 70 ball 100 thing works out quite well. And then you've got Pooran, who I think is a dynamite player. He's a wonderful cricketer. Nicholas Pooran, so much fun to watch. And Mayank Agarwal did quite well last year. And then, Jai Richardson gives them the death bowling option that they were sorely lacking last year. They tried it with Chris Jordan, didn't really do too much. They kept him on. And Sheldon Cottrell didn't work out for them last year either. You've got Riley Meredith as a backup option if Jai Richardson doesn't gets injured, or they want to leave out Chris Gale. Although Gale did quite well for them as an injection of energy in that number 3 slot.
But he's no spring chicken, so I can't see him playing every game. And like you say, they've got options now.
He won't play every game, but they've got those options. They picked up Shah Rukh Khan, which given his nominative similarity to one of India's greatest actors is absolute meme fodder for whoever's Punjab's Twitter account. Sarfaraz Khan, who I think is a very decent player, indeed. Two potentially interesting overseas all-rounder options. Fabian Allen, who again seems to go through his entire IPL career being a really good player.
That's got to be a bit of a bargain, hasn't it?
But probably won't play. But yeah, Fabian Allen for 75 lakh is a massive steal. Moises Henriques for 4.2 crore, a little bit less so, but a useful option potentially.
How do they get away with it?
I think it's Dan's talked about this before. It's the recency bias. People have seen Henriques be okay or above average in the BBL, and they're like, we need a player a bit like that, or we need a backup a bit like that. And they don't, rather than have a skill set they're looking to auction for or draft for, they have a player. And so if someone else shows interest in that player, they end up bidding too much. When actually they should be saying, oh, okay, well, that's like 1 crore is too much for him, or 2 crore is too much for him. Let's just get someone else with that skill set. And that, I mean, that's fundamentally, I think, how some of these players end up going as high as they do.
There's not just the recency bias, but the visibility bias. The BBL is televised in India, and it happens not that long before the auction. The Blast, for example, is not televised very heavily in India, and so you get an undervaluing perhaps of some English players. But it is on in Bangladesh, and so you just before and I think in Pakistan, which is why you seem to get a lot more English players playing the Bangladesh Premier League and the PSL.
Paul Sterling's just gone over to the PSL, hasn't he? And he went unsold in the IPL. It's that.
I don't think he even made it into the long list, did he?
Yeah,
no, he didn't.
You know, a quality T20 player, Paul Sterling.
And we've seen, and we've mentioned already, haven't we? Or we will mention that there's a few teams that could have done with a high scoring opening batsman. So it's an interesting point. I think we've been through quite a few of the players that the Punjab ended up picking up. I mean, overall, Moises Henriques is pretty uninspiring for the amount he cost, but they had a lot of money to spend, so it's not exactly a disaster. I think
they ended the auction with enough money to buy Chris Morris and have a little bit left over. They had a huge amount of money to spend.
Yeah, so perhaps maybe they should have been a little more trigger happy with their bidding. But I think overall they've probably had a positive auction. I think Jai Richardson is their marquee signing, and he's the most important player for them to fill the gaps that they need to fill. The other players that they picked up, I don't think they're a step down, particularly from anything they've released. I mean, Glenn Maxwell, they've let Glenn Maxwell go, and maybe he'll be brilliant this time around, but he wasn't for them last year. So you can understand why they freed up a bit of the purse for that. Jimmy Neesham was, they let him go. He's not necessarily going to be any better than Moises Henriques, and I think overall for me, I think probably positive, and that's mainly based on Jai Richardson.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Max. I think they were actually pretty big winners. I think they're one of the few teams that seem to have improved all of their big weaknesses.
Yeah.
There's, like you say, there's a question around whether Glenn Maxwell might be better than some of the players they brought in, but last year's Glenn Maxwell.
Yeah, well, Fabian Allen for 75 lakh could easily not score a 50 and throw down a few pies, and he's a lot cheaper. So
big winners for me.
Agreed.
Yeah, definite winners, and a little bit like Rajasthan now with those holes, with those weak links filled, their strong links are good enough to get them into the playoffs.
KKR.
Yeah, the Knight Riders. So Morgan's men needed a bit of a refresh to their lineup, looking for a bit more top order talent, we said, to go with a squad that is already full of proven T20 talent. But as they are proven talent, they didn't have much money to spend at the auction, which made it all the stranger that they didn't go for a kind of a bludgeoning top order bat, especially when there were some cheap ones available. Yes, we know Alex Hales was never going to go and play in the same franchise as Owen Morgan. We get it. But they could have gone someone for like Lewis, as well as Aaron Finch or Jason Roy, which they actually had the money to deliver on. They instead didn't even go for that. So they decided to retain someone like Tim Seifert, who I don't think is better than any of the three kind of aforementioned there. But, and the big but is that they did add to the rich tapestry that the IPL has of absolving cricketing misdemeanors. by picking up their former champion, Shakib Al Hassan, for 3.2 crore. And I think he will add some quality to the side. And we wrote an article on him saying that he's likely to come back here, and he duly did. Ben Cutting was also a good value pickup, considering the amounts being thrown around for people with a similar skill set to him, and he's got IPL experience. So all in all, I think that was okay. Domestic player-wise, in Karan Nair and Harbhajan Singh, I mean, they're not going to set the world alight. And I don't even know how old Harbhajan Singh is now. Is it, 45?
Not quite.
Yeah, again, but with their middle order, so they've already got people like Rahul Tripathi, Dinesh Karthik, and I kind of see Karan Nair is still in the same bracket as that, rightly or wrongly. So I'm just not too inspired by that. However, they have picked up Sheldon Jackson, who has gone on record numerous times saying that he wants to emulate his idol, Brendan McCullum. And is it Aurora that they've got, who's actually a pacer who has quite a lot of upside potentially. So I think if they can get the likes of Andre Russell back fit and firing, they could well be contenders. So I reckon it's pretty uninspiring. They weren't winners, weren't losers in this one. They were kind of in the middle. What do you think?
I've gone for them as a reasonably clear loser. I think there were some better options available. I don't really get why Ben Cutting plays in every single franchise league in the world. For instance, I think there are some more adventurous choices you can make there. I don't think Shakib Al Hassan was the sort of player that Kolkata Knight Riders needed. And I think a few of the other franchises have definitely improved their starting 11 and definitely improved their squad. And I don't think you can say that for KKR. So they're a loser in my book.
The thing is that KKR already had everything they needed. They just had a bunch of top order players not really performing. They shuffled their top order around a lot. They weren't sure whether to open with Narayan or bat him in the middle order, or bat Tripathi up the order, or down the order. Nitish Rana floated here, there, and everywhere. They couldn't work out in what order to bat Morgan, Karthik, and Andre Russell. They spent a huge amount of money on Pat Cummins last year and ended up playing him through most of the tournament, missing out on the, for me, T20 upside of Lockie Ferguson, who I think is a quality T20 operator.
Yeah.
And then the spinners weren't quite as effective as they needed them to be. Not bad, but not quite what they needed to be. Harbhajan Singh is 40 years old. A little bit expensive perhaps for that, but a very decent T20 spinner even at that age, and a huge almost like an extra spin bowling coach really for and Pavan Negi, who classic sort of IPL utility player. Ben Cutting similar but overseas, and very handsome as well, which can't be understated. Shakib is if Andre Russell gets injured or Sunil Narayan gets injured and you bring in Shakib Al Hassan, you've not weakened your team at all, for sure.
If you were playing a 50 over match, then you'd be right. But I think in T20s,
Shakib's done good work for KKR, and he did good work for the Sunrisers when he was available for them as well. The fact that he can get through his overs incredibly economically. He doesn't bring you anywhere near as much with the bat as an explosive player as Sunil Narayan, but he can get through his overs in a very economical manner, and he knows. You don't need to tell Shakib Al Hassan too much about preparing for a game. Obviously, he's been out of top level cricket for a little while, which is a little bit of an issue. He's got that injury again. And Ross, your point about him not reporting an approach, particularly given Brendan McCullum's past with reporting approaches and his spirit of MCC spirit of cricket speech could be quite interesting. Karan Nair is a backup option, potentially another one of these players who can bat pretty much anywhere in that top order. Tim Seifert, I think, he may not be better than a lot of those options, but he's a lot cheaper and has done a great deal of good for New Zealand. Again, if he plays, which I'm not sure he will. I don't think they've strengthened. I don't think they've weakened particularly.
Max, so it's you with this deciding vote almost.
Yeah, well, I think much like CSK, they sort of just didn't really bother, and I think it was a good point about the KKR team actually not being that bad and just not performing last year. We expected them to blow hot and cold in last year's IPL, and we expected some fireworks, and I think basically someone just left them in the fridge and forgot about them. So maybe this year all they need is just for all their players to turn up, then it'll be a different story.
Fair enough.
Royal Challengers Bangalore then, Max.
Oh yes, this is the fun one, isn't it? Royal Challengers Bangalore. Well, you've already alluded to it, Nakul, that we suspected when they released Chris Morris that it might be a ploy to try and buy him back cheaper. And the fact that they did jump in the early bids on him suggests that we were perhaps right on that. And we also said that it was likely to be a completely catastrophic plan because actually he's really useful for T20s because of what he can do. And so it proved with him now being the most expensive player in IPL history. So good start. Well done, RCB. Really, really nailed that one. So at this point, obviously they had a Chris Morris shaped hole to fit. And so, you want a bowler who can hit hard at the end of the innings. And they filled those big shoes with some very big feet in Carl Jamieson. Not exactly like for like, but like a quick bowler and looks like promising with the bat as well. So could be good, but he's new to the IPL, so it's a bit of a gamble. And it was a lot of money. So I mean, it's more than they were paying Chris Morris. So they're basically about 5 crore down already from where they started with not necessarily a better player. I mean, time will tell on that one. But I'm excited to see Carl Jamieson play. I don't know. I don't know about you guys, but I think he deserves a shot from what we've seen in the Test arena.
Well, you're definitely not going to have him as a backup, are you? You're not going to spend 1.5 million quid and then just go, "Oh, I'm not sure if you might get a go here."
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing with Jameson, and Dan mentioned this as well, is that Jameson's role so far in T20s has been to bowl 3 of his overs up front in the power play. That's not necessarily what Royal Challengers Bangalore needed. And actually, last year, when you saw them play with Chris Morris, they looked a much better side bowling-wise. They looked a bit dangerous. They looked tough to score off at the death. I think the jury's probably out on whether Jameson can do that role. So, as for everything involving Royal Challengers Bangalore, they're really hard to call as a winner or a loser based on that. If it turns out that Jameson is handy there, they're probably a big winner from this auction. If you bring in a bowler who can bowl at or can fill your can perform the areas that you're weak in Jameson, so say he is good up front and he is good at the death, and you bring in Glenn Maxwell, well, you have a pretty formidable starting 11 if you're Royal Challengers Bangalore. You've got Kohli, De Villiers, Maxwell. You can have Philippe opening the batting, or you can have Dan Christian as your kind of half and half batter slightly down the order. You've got Jameson bowling. You've got 4 really cheap Indian bowlers in Saini, Siraj, Chahal, and Sundar. So your bowling unit is really good, and the obvious imbalances in terms of where they've spent the money won't have that much of an impact. If, however, any of those positions in the lineup fail, they haven't really got anyone to step in.
So I think that's an excellent summary of what we've seen from RCB, because basically, I mean, they spent a load of money on Jameson. They've then spent a load more on Glenn Maxwell. And that meant that they'd released 10 players in this auction and then blew over 80% of their purse on 2. And
I would say winners,
that,
though, just to throw that in.
Yeah, but on top of that, what they had left, they spent on Dan Christian, who, I mean, he's very, very experienced, but he's 38, so it might be a little expensive. And it left them with 7 slots available to fill and basically 1 crore to do it with. So they picked up a lot of people for 20 luck. But some of those players aren't that bad. Like KS Barrett's a decent backup wicketkeeper, and they picked up Azruddin as well. So yeah, I would sort of, I don't know whether I would go so far as to say they were winners, because I think their IPL auction strategy is absolutely disgraceful and completely disastrous. But what hurts me the most is that it might actually work, because as Jack said, their potential first 11 is really good. It's just if there are a couple of injuries or people don't fire, it all unravels very, very quickly.
I mean, there's a couple more overseas players who could actually be very useful if they can get them into the team. Adam Zampa, very good T20 leg spinner.
Yep.
Actually did very well for them last year when he was able to play. And he and Chahal kind of locked up those middle overs. And Kay Richardson, who wasn't available last year because of paternity leave, actually he's a really good death bowler, Kane Richardson, and has been in domestic cricket and IPL cricket. And actually, I would be very tempted to start with him alongside Jameson, Maxwell, and De Villiers as your 4 overseas players. Mohammad Azharuddin is an opening batter as well as a wicketkeeper. Which means you have an opener alongside Padikkal, and AB de Villiers doesn't have to keep wicket. Whether they'll go with that or whether they'll stick with Josh Philippe at the top of the order, who seems a good player but a slightly one-dimensional one at this stage of his career. Seems a very good hitter of pace bowling, a bit weak against the spinners. You kind of maybe expect that from an Australian player at this stage of his career. And then the bowling attack, you got Washington Sundar, who can bowl at pretty much any stage of the innings. Chahal, who's a superb wrist spinner. Navdeep Saini and Carl Jamieson's properly quick. Siraj, who, is a little bit of a joke in T20 cricket in the IPL thus far. He's been very hittable. Obviously, a player of immense character, and will end up as a Test cricketer, probably, who shouldn't be. Who's kind of making up the numbers somewhat in T20 cricket. I mean, certainly his career so far suggests that he's a first-class bowler, a very good first-class bowler, but not a particularly good T20 bowler. Dan Christian, Daniel Sams as well. Good potential options if it all falls apart in terms of those injuries. I mean, RCB would be unbeatable if they had 5 overseas players allowed, basically.
Yeah. That's it, isn't it? How do they fit them all in? That's the question there.
Yeah, and that was kind of the issue last year to some extent. But what they have, I think they have filled their holes. They've got in quality fast bowling. Obviously, Kane Richardson coming back, and then Carl Jamieson.
I think arguably they didn't need to let the quality fast bowling go. I think that's
well, possibly, possibly. Although again, Chris Morris was a very good player for them and did balance that 11 very nicely. And they've also brought in someone in the middle order who can be destructive and take some of the pressure off Kohli and AB de Villiers, which means they don't have to bat so cautiously, which was a big problem for them last year. They weren't getting what they needed out of Kohli in particular, who was very aware of the fact that the batting sort of stopped after de Villiers. They bought a load of all-rounders in the last couple of years and then let them all go. Shivam Dube, Moeen Ali, Chris Morris, and Suru Udana, and Pavan Negi as well, all of whom they let go. Brought in Harsha Patel and Daniel Sams from Delhi in trades, who in their way are both very decent all-rounders. And Daniel Sams can be a good option for them at the death if they can fit him into the 11, which is debatable. I think the RCB are winners in this year's auction, albeit they've done it in this slightly mad Galactico way. But if you can't be good, at least be fun.
Ross, what do you reckon? Winner?
Yeah, I love the chaos that RCB bring. So winner for me.
Well, they got Glenn Maxwell, didn't they? And that was probably the prize asset of this auction. So it's difficult to look at them another way.
Sunrisers Hyderabad.
Sunrisers Hyderabad.
Well,
they didn't do anything.
This will be quick.
This will be swift. And it'll be swift, and there wasn't much going on, and yet I still think they might actually have had the worst auction of everyone, because they retained both Jason Holder and Mitch Marsh for no apparent reason, because they're fairly similar and not that good at T20 cricket, and so that left them with about 10 crore to spend and 3 slots to fill, one of which was overseas. So you think it's pretty obvious really that maybe they could have just done with a bit of fast bowling, maybe an all-rounder, and just go all in for one thing. And in the end, they did almost the exact opposite of what would have been sensible. They picked up Najib for their overseas slot, who, bearing in mind they already have Rashid Khan, who will play, and Mohammad Nabi, who won't play. Having another Afghanistani spinner who won't play doesn't seem like it makes much sense to me. And then they picked up Kedar Jadhav, who has a strike rate of about 120 in T20 cricket, which is not the firepower that they need, and ended up with about 7 crore left out of the 10 that they had. So for me, it's just absolutely mind-boggling. So surely they could have just gone in for someone all in, and if you get priced out, you get priced out, and then you can fall back to plan F, which was what they did, rather than trying to do that from the start.
It was a classic case of, we're good. We're pass, thank you. You ever played poker with someone who just checks every single round?
Yeah.
The Sunrisers are if we say RCB are the most chaotic, the Sunrisers are the least chaotic team in the IPL. They know exactly what they're trying to do. They get enough runs on the board to let their Indian fast bowlers do the business, which has worked for them
I suppose last year
it's the Perth Scorchers model, basically, plus Rashid Khan. Yeah, Bhuvaneshwar Kumar is, him fit for the season makes a huge difference. Nathrajan has come on leaps and bounds. His rate of improvement's fantastic. Siddharth Kaul, a very decent bowler. The bit of a slightly wobbly middle order. Jason Holder did pretty well for them actually last year, and I watched I watched the entirety of the CPL. I covered the CPL as them doing their match reports, and Jason Holder's range hitting, batting in that sort of 4 or 5 position for the Tridents, was very impressive.
I really like Jason Holder as a cricketer. I don't like Mitchell Marsh as a cricketer, especially one that's you're going to play in India. Like his average versus spin is pretty low compared to what it is against pace bowling. And actually, I'm just not sure how he fits into that side.
Yeah, he's someone who can bowl a few overs in the middle and is a destructive hitter of pace, but is a bit limited against spin bowling. Jason Holder will give you another top order option. Top order like early innings bowling option alongside Bhuvneshwar Kumar. Don't whatever you do, bowl him as a death bowler. People have tried this before, and it doesn't. It just makes me sad watching Jason Holder bowl to death. Rashid Khan is Rashid Khan. Don't really need to talk about him too much because he's that good. Can they fit Warner and Bairstow into the same 11? I'm not sure they can. Again,
no.
Which is a problem, given that they're their two best batters, really. But then again, Kane Williamson's been so good in that kind of this role that no one else seems to be able to do. That it might well be, and that they'll have to go with Warner, Ridhaman Saha as this unlikely pinch hitting option, which somehow works, and then Williamson, a sort of massive okay in the middle order. Abdul Samad should be a better player than he is, and I'm sure will be better for the experience. Vijay Shankar a bit hit and miss. Jason Holder, Rashid Khan, and then you're kind of fiddling around again. Mujib, world class player, in the wrong team. As he was last year at Punjab. A few young Indian players, Virat Singh and Priyam Garg, the two mainstays of that India under-19 team that lost in the final, probably won't play. Khalil Ahmed's a good backup option to Natarajan and Bhuvi. I wonder how much longer they can wring Sandeep Sharma out for. But again, it seems to be a little bit of a keep going with this, see if it works, and if it doesn't
next year,
and if it doesn't, we'll throw it all up in the air. Next year. Some talk that Tom Moody might be coming back to that franchise as an assistant coach to Trevor Bayliss, which would be an interesting, which could be an interesting little move. Oh, another coaching thing, actually, by the way. Kumar Sangakkara is now going to be the head coach at Rajasthan. They've let Andrew McDonald go.
Well, they're going to win then.
It's the reverse Daniel Vittori.
Big losers for me, Jack.
Yeah, I say big losers as well. Let's move on to the Capitals. All of our talk prior to this auction was about how they could refine their team. We thought they were pretty good last year, and we thought there was a particular area they could refine their team in, and that was basically by picking up some guys who could hit boundaries. But they didn't, did they? They decided that they were gonna pick up Steve Smith. Let's keep this reasonably quick here, fellas, because we're up to the hour and a half mark roughly for the podcast overall, and it would be good if we can keep it to about 90 minutes. Why did they pick up Steve Smith, Max?
I have absolutely no idea. There are so many better players they could have picked up for less money. Alex Hales didn't even go.
Yeah, I really don't. I honestly can't see why they wouldn't pack up Hales.
I've got a theory on this. So I think that because Steve Smith was early in the auction, they were a bit trigger happy. They were just like, we've got to get in this. People are buying players. We're not buying anyone. Like, what can we do? And
what if they sell out?
Yeah, all these players might go so quickly, might miss out, and then they blew some money on Steve Smith.
My theory is that they thought they would push up the price for someone else, and then no one else came in. It's quite a cheap punt in a way, but it seems bizarre that you would go into the auction thinking that another anchor is what you need. Realistically,
it was really odd.
It wasn't really. I mean, last year you had they were too cautious actually with the bat. I think what they've taken from failing to win the tournament last year and only getting to the final and sort of kind of stumbling over the line is that they need more solidity in their batting lineup, and more predictability.
The captain of the team who came bottom.
Well, indeed, and who is one of the greatest Test players of all time already, but has never been an elite T20 player and possibly never will be, even at his peak.
They could have got Pujara for 50 lakh.
Well, indeed, yeah. And freed up an overseas slot.
Yeah.
Mate, you had never taken Pujara for CSK. They needed to boost their average age up a little bit more. They would have spent the rest of their budget on Pujara.
I think if they've decided that they wanted more solidity and more of a calm head, they've taken the wrong lesson, I think, from last year, which is basically let Rishabh Pant be Rishabh Pant, because the rest of it wasn't working out too badly. Shikhar Dhawan had a pretty good year last year. Shreyas Iyer was able to do a job for them. Marcus Stoinis, I think, was a revelation, despite the fact they continue batting him in the middle order, and was actually very good with the ball for them last year. And the bowling really wasn't, maybe they needed more power play wickets, but Ishant Sharma being fit for most of the season will help that. If Rabada and Nohir are available for most of the season, obviously that's a big deal. Umesh Yadav also gives them a power play bowling option, and they've got Chris Wokes available this time. If they had stopped, if they'd done everything else right and just stuck with buying Billings and Wokes and Tom Curran and Umesh Yadav and then a few extra, Ripod Patel actually, by the way, who had a very good domestic T20 tournament for India, might actually be someone who they're looking at as a starting option, someone who is a powerful player, just as someone who just kind of balances that attack quite nicely. But I think it would have been fine if they hadn't then also bought Stephen Smith, which gives you the obligation to play him and thus screw up the rest of your balance.
I honestly, Steve Smith, I as a strategic move by people who should know better. Astonishing. Anyway, quick winners and losers. Ross, winner or loser?
I think they were a loser along with picking up Tom Curran for 5.25 crore.
Yeah, I didn't understand that either, but that's for another day. We can talk about that in the IPL preview show. I'm going to say loser. Max?
Yep, loser.
And Nakul?
Yeah, loser. Purely based on the Stephen Smith pickup. At least Tom Curran is justifiable as a punt.
Yeah. Mumbai Indians then were the final team in the auction. They didn't really need to do that much, I didn't think. They had the best team last year. They had a lot of the best players. So there wasn't really an obvious area that they were weak. Max, they picked up some backups. Were any of those backups particularly notable to you?
To be honest, I think Jimmy Neesham for 50 lakh is quite good, I think. But I think they've spent quite a lot on some of the other backups. Nathan Coulter-Nile and particularly surprising.
I think Nathan Coulter-Nile might actually play for them, so it justifies the money.
Well, that's all right then. But Shawler for 2.4, I'm not sure about.
But they did need another spinner. They only really had Rahul Chahar last year. I think the one thing they don't have.
I suppose they muddled through, didn't they, with Krunal and.
Yeah, is a world-class spinner, and they sort of make it up. Adam Milne, who had a very good BBL for the Thunder, could be a good option for them as a basically doing what James Pattinson did for them last year, except he can also bowl at the death. I'm glad to see that Mumbai have stayed with their strategy of going for very burly Antipodeans in Nathan Coulter-Nile, Adam Milne, and Jimmy Neesham. Piyush Chawla, experienced option. Then Yudhvir Singh Charak, an up-and-coming Indian seamer. Marco Jansen, who I'm fairly sure played for Blackburn in the mid-90s. And then rounded off the auction with the big news, if RCB bought Sachin Baby, Mumbai have bought Sachin's baby.
Yeah, it's what we all wanted to see. It's a shame RCB didn't end up with them both.
Right, fellas, last one then. Mumbai Indians, were they winners or losers? I've got them down as slight winners because I think they got some okay backups. Ross?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
Max?
They didn't sell their entire squad, so winners for me.
Yeah. Nakul, last word to you.
It would have been pretty difficult for Mumbai to end up losing this auction, and they've slightly won.
Yeah. Right, that's the end of the cricket podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Ross, do you want to play us out by telling everyone where they can find us?
Yep, they should follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Cricket Pod, and subscribe on our YouTube channel and tell your friends about it. Tell your friends, and we'll have even more guests on and have even more great content. Nakul, thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks very much. Would be remiss of me to not plug Guerilla Cricket's coverage of the third test between India and England. We'll be on air at 8:45 a.m. UK time on Wednesday. Keep an eye on Twitter for exactly the full details of that. But GuerillaCricket.com. We're also on Hot Mic and Facebook Live and YouTube.
God, my working week is going to really take a pounding.
Right, we will be back next week with probably a review show of that third test. Bye.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
I think it was a disgraceful performance, and I think it should never be permitted to happen again.
That is very good.